Hey, how's it going everybody? So recently I had somebody suggest to me that I do a video of my top 10 most favorite movies of all time, which I thought was a pretty cool idea because, I mean, that way, you get to know a little bit about my taste in movies, where I'm coming from, that kind of stuff. And at first I thought, wow, this is going to be really difficult because anytime I get asked that question, there's like three that I can sort of come up with on the spot, but overall, I mean, there's thousands of movies that I love, and trying to narrow it down like that, it's kind of like if you had like thousands of kids and you had to name your favorite 10. But anyway, I thought this was a really cool idea, so thank you, Tyler, for the suggestion. So I gave it some thought, a lot of thought, and I've come up with a list of what I pretty much think are my 10 most favorite movies of all time. So without further ado, number 10. Now, Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino are two of my most favorite and influential filmmakers of all time. So when the two of them collaborated on this movie, with Tarantino writing and Rodriguez directing, you had my interest from the word go, and what they ended up giving us I thought was fantastic. I love this movie. It is such a fun vampire movie, and I love the way that it just throws a complete curveball by starting off as like a crime drama sort of a thing with really interesting characters, and then all of a sudden halfway through it just does a 180 and becomes a horror movie. And I love so much about this movie. I love the characters, the dialogue, I mean, Tarantino, the music, like the soundtrack for this film is absolutely amazing. It was just but the thing for me overall, it was just such a damn cool movie. I mean, the characters were such badasses, and even wimpy characters became badasses at the end, that kind of thing. I love the vampire design. I love, Tex-Mex sort of flavor that the movie had. And aside from that, I really dug the ending as well. I just thought it ended on a perfect note. And if you've loved the movie and you're not aware, there's actually a TV series that was based off of it. I think they've done 2 seasons now. I've only seen the first one, but it's really, really good. It takes the concept of the movie but elaborates on it a whole lot more. And yeah, it's really worth watching. So number 10 was From Dusk Till Dawn. Love it. I checked out Clerks when it first came out on video, and it was nothing short of a life-changing experience. This was the movie that inspired me to become a filmmaker. I watched it and was just absolutely fascinated by how they achieved so much with so little. It was filmed in the convenience store where Kevin Smith worked at the time, and it was one of those great lessons in filmmaking, especially when you're starting off, where you use what you've got. Don't go and spend extra money on things that you need or that you don't have. Just everything that you've got, write it into your script, and that way you can achieve a lot. And I love so much that it was such a talky film, but the dialogue was just so entertaining. And these people spoke to me. I mean, they were my friends. They were the conversations they had, that sort of thing, were conversations that I had with my friends and stuff like that. So I really had a connection with the film. And aside from that, I mean, it's really funny as well. So yeah, number 9, Clerks. Love that movie. Okay, so back when this came out, my friend Steve said to me, hey, let's go and see this movie Napoleon Dynamite. And straight away, I don't know, I just had this mental image of a movie about a talking dog. And I was like, really? And he was like, no, let's go see it. It's the ultimate high school nerd movie. I was like, oh God, do we really need another one of them? So I sat down, and what I saw was the most mind-blowing independent film I've possibly ever seen. This movie, it was like nothing I've ever seen before, and that's one of the things I love so much about it, is that it's truly unique in everything, in the direction, the characters, dialogue, acting, everything about this movie was incomparable to anything else. It is chock full of great characters who you instantly fall in love with and will remember for the rest of your days. It's so quotable. There's so many lines of dialogue in the movie that to this day, my girlfriend and I, we still quote almost on a daily basis. The script and story were great. It wasn't like your typical Hollywood high school nerd movie at all. It was just something so vastly different. And I remember, at the time when it came out, I was working at a video store, and when we got it, it stayed on the new release shelf for, God, I think it was like 2 or 3 months. It was such a popular renter. It didn't do that well at the box office when it was in theaters, but it gained a cult following afterwards, and well deserved. It is such a fantastic movie. Better Off Dead came out in 1985, and I watched it again last night, and it is still hilariously funny. It is just relentless from start to finish. In terms of, say, laughs per minute, it is one of the greatest comedies ever made, seriously. And it's sort of one of those things, it's not your typical kind of humor. It was really surreal and borderline absurdist humor in a way. So, I don't know, it's probably not going to appeal to everybody, but I really dug it. The film was largely autobiographical from things that happened in the writer-director Savage Steve Holland's life, and that just kind of adds a whole layer to the film. Like, you're just thinking to yourself, my God, things like this actually happened in real life. I mean, okay, they were probably kind of exaggerated a little bit, but it's one of those things. This movie was such an influence on me. I even ripped off a line of dialogue in the film for something I made myself.
What is Lane doing up at this hour on a Sunday? Doesn't he turn to dust or something if the sun hits him before noon?
What the hell are you doing up this early? It's not even 9:30 yet. Don't you turn into a pile of dust if the sun hits you before noon?
That's how much I love this movie. I just had to reference it in one of my own short films, so check it out. It is really, really funny from start to finish, and it still holds up to this day. Guys, it's Back to the Future. Do I even need to say why I love this film? I mean, it's one of the most entertaining films of all time. It had such amazing characters, and the whole plot, the whole concept of going back in time to change something that happens in the future and, all this sort of stuff was so entertaining. It really is just one of the most fun, entertaining, action-packed films ever made. It doesn't stop. There's not a boring moment in the entire film. And I think it was also a case of perfect casting. Admittedly, Michael J. Fox wasn't the first choice to play Marty McFly, but I mean, really, can you imagine anyone else in that role? And Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown, holy crap, he owned that role. And not only that, it made a pretty cool car out of the DeLorean as well. Now we come to my most favorite horror movie of all time. The original Japanese version of Ring. Not The Ring, which, it was okay, but I'm talking the original. Now, I'm going to do a full review of this movie at some point soon because there are just no words to express how much I love this movie. It led to an obsession with Japanese or Asian horror movies in general, and to me, they are the best horror movies on the planet. But this was the one that kind of kick-started it all. Now, there's just something that is so bleak and dark and disturbing and horrible about this film. It's like when you're watching it, there's just this grey cloud hanging over your head. It is gloomy, and I love that. I actually love really dark movies because I think because I'm such a generally, happy kind of person, I kind of like to balance things out a little bit with really dark, disturbing movies. And yeah, this one is just so depressingly bleak, but I love it. And aside from that, if anything, just that scene towards the end involving a TV, which I won't spoil, but, if you've seen it, you know what I mean. I mean, that scene it just gets under your skin. I remember showing this movie to a friend of mine once, and he told me that he slept with the light on for a week afterwards. Yeah, it's just my favorite horror movie. Now, I remember back in 1988, my sister took me to the movies to see this thing called Die Hard. I had no idea what it was at the time. I was just going because my sister wanted to go to the movies and she wanted me for some company. I also remember walking out of that theater just in absolute disbelief at what I had just seen. This is the best action movie of all time. Now, I know that's a matter of choice, a matter of taste. I know. But to me, it just defined the genre at that point in time. I loved so much that the hero in the movie was kind of a everyman. You know, he wasn't like a superhero cop or anything like that. He didn't have like amazing skills and stuff like that. A lot of the time he had to use his brain to try and overcome problems. And he was vulnerable. I mean, you know, there were a lot of times where he got genuinely hurt in the film. It also gave us one of the best action movie scores of all time. Next time you watch the movie, if you haven't already noticed, listen to the soundtrack. I'm not kidding. It is one of the best action movie soundtracks ever made. It was, I don't know, it was just so unique to the film. And, you know, even the subsequent sequels kind of imitated the music from that film. It is extraordinary. And aside from all that, you know, it was just such a big 80s blockbuster. I mean, it had an exploding building with Bruce Willis jumping out of the explosion, for God's sake. I mean, you know, you can't get much bigger than that, really. So like I said before, I like dark, disturbing movies, and man, if you're after something that is going to really leave you feeling emotionally drained, The Crow, you can't get much better than that. This is a dark, gothic love story. I know it has elements of action, it has elements of the supernatural, that kind of stuff, but to me, at front and center, it is a beautiful love story. And I mean, you know, the whole thing with Brandon Lee and everything just adds so much heaviness to watching the film. But even if that hadn't happened, it is still just such a beautiful masterpiece of a film. I love everything about it. The dialogue is really poetic in a way, and the cinematography, the lighting, everything was just, I don't know, so gritty and well, dark. Note to self, come up with a different word for dark. And not only that, this movie gave us two amazing 90s soundtracks. The actual score soundtrack was phenomenal, but the music soundtrack with the songs and everything, oh man, that today is still one of my most favorite albums ever made. I love it. It just captured the 90s so well. I think, you know, that's one of the things, like, I mean, to me, the 90s was probably my favorite decade for music and film, and man, it doesn't get much more 90s than The Crow. I'm never, ever going to forget my first experience with seeing Seven. A friend of mine and I, we went to the movies to see it, not really knowing what to expect from it. And I remember we were sitting there as the end credits were rolling down the screen, and we were just in complete silence. And the credits ended, we got up, we walked out to the car park, we hadn't said a word. We were shattered, absolutely shattered. Got in the car, as we were driving off, you know, we were finally like, so that was intense. And that's the thing with this movie, it gets you. It is such a disturbing flick. I mean, a lot of people have said this is a horror film, and you couldn't really hold it against them because, you know, there are a lot of horror elements to it. Not your typical horror as such, but just in as much as it is so plausible. I mean, this movie, you know, it paints a picture of just how disturbing and bleak and decaying this world can really be. But there's so many things I love about this movie. I mean, the casting, the performances were just everyone at the top of their game. I love the reveal of who the killer is. If you haven't seen it, I'm not going to spoil it, but let's just say it was a surprise A-list Hollywood actor who suddenly turned up and was the villain in the film. The music was perfect. It was just such a perfect movie score as far as, enhancing the scenes and capturing moods, that kind of thing. The cinematography was up there with the best I've ever seen. I mean, not just the camera angles and the use of handheld and steady cams and that sort of thing, but the process they did on the film, which, they did a treatment to the film to sort of give it that high contrast brownie sort of look, and it was perfect. The production design, the killer's journals in this movie, they actually had a team of people who hand wrote every single page of these journals, which were on screen for a few seconds or whatever. It was crazy. But aside from that, look, I gotta admit, I'm a big fan of downer endings, and it doesn't get much more of a downer ending than this film. I'm not gonna spoil anything again, but what happens at the end of this film, oh man, it's just, like I said, it leaves you shattered. This movie gets to you, and I really, really love Seven. Now, before I reveal what my number one favorite movie is of all time, I've got a few honorable mentions because, like I said, this was not an easy list to whittle down to 10. I mean, there were so many movies that I was like, oh, I want to add this movie to the list, but do I really like it more than this movie? And oh man, I went through this whole thing. It was so traumatic. So that being said, look, I do have a bunch of movies that, were ones that almost made it into my top 10. So I'm going to give them an honorable mention. So I'm going to start this with Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, oh man, it killed me that it didn't make it into my top 10 because this movie, kind of like Die Hard later on in the 80s, I mean, this movie redefined the action genre. It gave us one of the most iconic action movie tough guys of all time and was just so much fun. Next is Terminator 2. I mean, it's Arnold. I can't believe I didn't get to put an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie in my top 10 list, but this one I think is his greatest movie of all time. Also putting Rosemary's Baby on this list because, this movie came out in 1968 and is still amazing to watch. It's so claustrophobic in its tension as it goes on, and like I mentioned before about how I love downer endings, the ending of this movie was crazy. Also giving love to the original Nightmare on Elm Street because, there were slasher movies before this one, but none had the imagination that went into this flick, and the whole premise of not being safe when you go to sleep because your dreams are going to mess you up. Wes Craven, you are a crazy man. This is a movie you probably haven't seen, and you need to see it. It was so close to being in my top 10 because it's one of the funniest movies ever. The first time I saw it, I watched it twice in the one day. I saw it earlier in the day and I couldn't believe what I'd seen, so I showed it to a friend of mine later that night. It is hilariously funny. Firefly is my most favorite TV show of all time. If you haven't seen it, you need to check it out. Serenity was kind of a movie-length episode that was a closure to the series because they only made one season and then it got cancelled. And it is a near-perfect movie in terms of action, comedy, suspense. Like, it's got everything in it, and it's really hard to get through this movie with a dry eye because of certain reasons that I'm not going to go into. Also putting Pan's Labyrinth into this list because, as far as bleak, disturbing, sad, heart-wrenching films, it doesn't get much more heart-wrenching than this one. And aside from that, I mean, God, the production design and cinematography, everything, it's just one of the most beautiful looking movies ever made. But yeah, keep the Kleenex handy if you're watching this movie. This one's another one that you probably haven't seen because not many people seem to have seen this movie, but I'm a massive fan of Mike Judge, who created Beavis and Butthead, and this was his writer-directorial debut for a feature film, and man, it is absolutely brilliant. If you work in a dreary job, particularly an office, you've got to watch this movie because you are going to connect to these characters so much. It is brilliant. This movie right here, it is going to mess you up. Seriously. If you ever thought about doing hard drugs and you're like, I wonder if that's a good idea, watch this movie. You are never, ever gonna touch that stuff. And finally, these two movies, which I've recently done reviews of, so you kind of know why I love them so much. If you haven't seen those reviews, go check them out. There's a Spinal Tap, Blair Witch Project, love them. Which brings us to my number one most favorite movie of all time. Now, this is something that I saw when I was a really little kid. In fact, it's pretty much my first ever childhood memory was seeing this movie, and it changed my life. Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Like I said, my first memory as a 4-year-old kid was being taken to the drive-in, and that shot of Vader walking through the corridor at the start was the first thing I can ever remember in life, and it really had a profound effect on me as a little kid, and it is something that I've never actually grown out of. I am still a massive Star Wars fan. Now, here's the thing. Okay, you're probably saying, but hang on, why don't you have Empire Strikes Back in there instead? Because it is, to me, a better movie. Well, to a lot of people. And while I agree, yeah, Empire Strikes Back was the best of the whole Star Wars bunch, but, you know, this is the movie that started it all. Without this movie, there would be no Empire Strikes Back. You know, there would be no toy obsession when I was a kid that I still kind of have. I mean, seriously, those action figures when I was a kid, they were my whole life. And I guess, you know, I'm putting it in this number one spot of my most favorite movies because, yeah, you know, it was that whole thing of, it was my childhood. You know, my whole childhood was Star Wars, and that was where it all began. So, yeah, even though Empire is the better of the bunch, I've got to hand it to Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope as my number one most favorite life-changing movie of all time. So there you go, guys. That is my 10 most favorite movies of all time, which I'm sure, I don't know, maybe down the track in a few years I might think differently or something might come along that I think, oh, I've got to put this in my top 10. Who knows? And please keep in mind, this is just my list of my most favorite movies. This isn't what I consider the 10 best movies of all time. They're not like the best made movies or anything like that, but they're my favorite movies. These are the movies that really appeal to me and, you know, inspire me in a way, that kind of thing. So before you start getting under the comment section and going, oh my God, I can't believe you didn't put this movie in here or anything like that, it's because this is my personal 10 favorite movies, so there you go. So thank you very much for checking out this video, and thank you very much for everyone for supporting my channel, because I've just recently hit 5,000 views on the channel, so I'm pretty happy about that, and I gotta hand it to all you guys. Thank you so much. I genuinely appreciate everyone who's subscribed, who's watched my videos, who's shared my stuff, that kind of thing. It really means a lot to me. Anyway, I've just looked at the time and I've actually got to go because I've got a ticket to see Magnificent 7 and it starts in about 15 minutes. Oopsies. So thanks again, everybody. Drop me some comments. Let me know what you think about my list of favorite movies, either here or on Facebook. All my social media links are in the description below because I like to talk about movies and I would love to talk about movies with you. See you soon.
Click subscribe to stay up to date with all the latest movie reviews. Skynet will be taking over any day now, so what have you got to lose? Nyah.